So welcome everyone to Street Smart Product Manager Live. I'm your host, Shardul. We have a great show for you today. We're going to be talking about a topic that's been highly requested, moving from outputs to outcomes. What are they? How do you do it? And what the heck are outcomes anyways? And why are they important? So to help us, we're joined by a very special guest, Scott Sehlhorst of Tyner Blain, who I'll introduce shortly. For those of you who are meeting me for the first time, I'm Shardul, founder of the Street Smart Product Manager newsletter and host of the show. You can read the slide. I've been around and done a bunch of stuff, startups and Fortune 100s and everything in between. I help PMs develop their careers as well as guide organizations in building and growing their product practice in a no-nonsense way that maximizes business impact. I do that mainly through this show. I see a lot of regulars coming back here, so see a lot of new folks. Also, my free newsletter. I don't talk about frameworks and methodologies or having a product mindset or any of that stuff. I cut through all that and focus on down-to-earth, practical, real-world tactics, just the things that I've learned that actually matter in over 30 years of doing this. So you can go to streetsmartproductmanager.com and subscribe if you haven't already. So let's get into today's topic, and then let me introduce Scott. So as a product management community, if you've been following the blogosphere and LinkedIn, social media, and all of that, we seem to have decided that outputs are bad and that outcomes are good. We all need to stop being Commodus and we need to be more like Jim Carrey. But here's the part that at least I don't see anyone talking about coherently, whether it's on LinkedIn posts or podcasts or webinars. So what exactly do we mean by outcomes? And I'm going to even just ask some more very basic questions. What do we mean by outputs? Why are outputs bad? What do we mean by outcomes? Why are outcomes better than outputs? What outcomes actually count, especially with leadership? And how do we then make that shift? So today, I want to be able to clear all of that up. And that's why I invited Scott to join us on today's episode. So Scott Sehlhorst is president of Tyner Blain. Some of you may know his newsletter, which is also called Tyner Blain. Honestly, it's one of the best out there. When I was starting out in product management, I found most blogs and newsletters pretty useless, to be honest. But Tyner Blain was one that stood out. So Scott has over 30 years of experience across product management, engineering, and software development. Through his work at Tyner Blain, he's helped companies make better product decisions by improving how they define problems, connect strategy to execution, and evaluate outcomes. There's that word again. He has helped clients as diverse as Hewlett Packard and Dell, Mercer, the Ford Motor Company, First National Bank of Omaha, Sabre Airline Solutions, Zappos, and the Newport News Shipyard, and of course, among many more. He's taught competitive product strategy at the master's level since 2012 and brings a deeply practical, real-world perspective to modern product challenges. He's an adjunct, I can't say that word very well, adjunct professor at Ukrainian Catholic University and Lviv Business School in Ukraine, and has been a visiting lecturer at Technological University Dublin. He's also a graduate of one of my alma maters, Carnegie Mellon University, so he's obviously awesome. Although I followed Scott's blog for years, never got a chance to meet him until recently through a mutual friend, Mike Smart, who actually came on this show last year, and I was absolutely thrilled to finally meet Scott, and we instantly connected because Scott has been talking about outcome-driven product management for years, really decades probably, right? But it seems to be very popular today. So given our topic, I really couldn't think of anyone better to help us through it than Scott. So Scott, welcome. I'm so delighted to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much, Shardul. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it is. It's kind of fortunate. The zeitgeist seems to have pointed at my soapbox about outcomes. Hopefully, I can figure out a good way to take advantage of them. But yeah, this is I don't know. It's my passion project in the product management space. I've had some really good debates, like in your list of things we were going to talk about around, what are outputs and why are outputs bad? The way I think about it is the outputs are the things we build and ship. And I actually don't think they're bad. I think to get to where I'm pushing, I have to think about where almost everybody else pushes.
Mm,
So many people push on outputs and delivery and flow metrics and say-do ratios and how much stuff do we get out the door. And they focus on that stuff. And I would argue that that's the stuff that's easy to measure and not
right.
the stuff that's important to measure. And the reason why I make that case is because 80% of products fail. 80% of features go unused in the products that do succeed, right? We have this stat that says my inference from that is 80% of the work you're doing, you shouldn't be doing. And so tracking how much work you get done, you're diluting the effectiveness of that measurement by 80%. So instead, focus on putting better work into the system. Focus on the outcomes and not the outputs. Don't try and get more predictable, even though like Simon, when we were working together, that was one of the drums I had to beat because of our situation. The predictability of output is not nearly as valuable as predictability of outcome. And outputs are so important. You're not going to get any outcomes without outputs. But fundamentally, if you're working on the wrong stuff, it doesn't matter if you ship it.
I think that's a great start, Scott. So the chat, of course, is already lighting up. And I think I shared this with you. When people signed up for this episode, I think we got almost like 100 people, and a bunch of comments, which I think I shared many of them with you. But I know we didn't have this wasn't going to be a very slide heavy session that we were going to have, but I know you had one slide just to kind of frame things up. You want to go to that, and then we can kind of use that as jumping off point?
Sure, that'd be great. Yeah, so when Shardul asked me for slides, I was really being pretty lazy. I was like, well, okay, I don't have slides, but here, let me grab one slide from a deck from some work I've been doing with a client and trying to help them think about the transformation we're going from did we finish, right? That focus on outputs. Hey, I'm done, I've shipped it, what's next? To the more important questions around whether or not what I shipped actually worked and whether or not it mattered. And those are the two different frames that we use to get into outcomes. And probably a good way, another good thing to call out because there are some really good people who I respect a lot who use the term outcome in a different way than I do. They they will talk about outcomes in terms of what I would classify as did it work. I'm trying to build something to increase engagement. The outcome is I increased engagement. Like that's the language that they would use. And I personally, I think that approach, while great from a user experience point of view, underemphasizes the business acumen dimensions of product management. And so instead, I would say I'm trying to build something to increase engagement. Engagement is that observable change. And I'll use that term and maybe we'll cycle back into it. I don't know which way the conversation is going to go. That tells me if I built something, it successfully pulled the lever I'm trying to pull. But there is a secondary question. Does increasing engagement make us more money? Does increasing engagement advance our strategy? Right? There is an economic outcome associated with the things we're trying to do, whether it's increase engagement, increase average order size, retention, reduce attrition, change cross-sell metrics. Like there's all these different things that we can try and affect as product managers of like what are we trying to do to change the world around us? And that's where we get our sort of our feedback loops. And all of those changes we're trying to create are the leading indicators of value. And so where some other people will talk about those observable changes, that stuff in the middle, as outcomes, and then they will talk about business outcomes. I think the business outcomes are the outcomes. And the other stuff is just a means to an end.
Yeah.
So I pedantically will say outcome is an economic benefit.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I was doing a training at one company and I was talking to one of their product managers. She'd been a product manager for a while, but she was relatively new to the company. This was in the healthcare space, and I asked her, what are you working on? What are you responsible for? And she said that, oh, we have to make it easier for providers to schedule patients. That's my metric. And she has some data and the metric, and there's a number she's trying to move. I was like, great. Okay, well, why is that important? Why does that matter? Well, I mean, obviously, we want to be able to, it's a good patient experience. the providers can see more patients, all that kind of user experience stuff. And I said, right, right, but why does that matter? Why does that care? Why does anybody care about that? And more importantly, just to be, I kind of got a little bit blunt about it. And I said, why did the company hire you? They're paying your salary. You have whatever number of engineers on your team. You guys are all working on this. Your CFO knows what that costs. So why does any of that matter? And so, anyways, then I helped to kind of connect the dots back. But I think that's kind of a key missing gap where you're connecting sort of those, you use engagement. This one was scheduling. Whatever are those product level metrics, what do they connect back to in terms of either directly or indirectly in terms of moving the needle for the business?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a client who put it very succinctly. What she said during the meeting, she said, "Oh, you're talking about the so what of the initiative."
Right.
Instead of saying, "Hey, this is what we're going to go do," well, so what? Why is that important?
Yeah. So a lot of what I hear though from product managers and some product leaders are things like, how do I know which are the business outcomes that are important? Or here's another one, and you can take these in any order you'd like. How do I get access to the data? I'm at a company where access to that data, whether it's the sales data or the financial data, is not easy, or maybe it's behind some closed wall or something like it's heavily guarded state secret. Like, how do I get access to that so I know how to connect my work to those things, to those financial or business metrics?
Yeah, navigating those kinds of barriers in my experience is a little bit different everywhere. One of the forcing function questions I've used is what are you willing to spend on it? If we say, hey, I'm trying to increase retention or make it easier for people to do anything, what are you willing to spend? And what I found is just about everywhere that I've been, people are really comfortable saying, this is what I expect it to cost, but they struggle with saying, this is what it's worth. And when you say, what are you willing to spend? It opens a different question. And if you do it well, right, don't be as blunt as I am on the call here to say, well, I don't know. I'm willing to spend 1/6 of what the benefit is, or I'm willing to spend 80% of what the benefit is. Like whatever that, okay, great. That gets whoever you're working with to ask the question of what's the benefit. And they say, well, I don't know. Okay, who would know? Ask that person. I don't know. Who would know? Well, you can't have that information. Why not? Can you help us understand the financial impact of that?
Yeah.
Like one of the paths we go down, and I've had good success with this with 3 or 4 clients, one of whom is on the call, is building a value driver tree. And it's really easy to throw shade at value driver trees because they come out of like the McKinseys and Bains of the world, the really expensive management consulting folks. But it's a super useful tool. I had a client in financial services where like a value driver tree says, here are the levers I can affect, and I'm going to connect them in a tree back up to how they cause us to make money. So I had a client in financial services where they make money based on management fees for the assets they have under management. And so how you get more assets under management is how you drive more profit for the
Yeah.
company, right? So you get that connection. In the airline space, I had a client in the airline space where it starts to get a lot more complicated. It's like, well, the airline makes more money when they fly planes that are more full, right? You don't fly empty seats because the costs are effectively fixed. The extra
Right.
weight of one passenger has a minimal impact on the cost of that flight.
Right.
So then you work backwards and say, well, what's the value of changing our e-commerce model? What's the value of changing the system we use to connect with online travel agents? And you can work back up these chains to say, here's how we make more money.
Yeah. Arun, I see your hand raised. Give me a second, because Scott, I think there's a really important point which you're making here, which is you need to understand your underlying business model. You need to understand the context in which you're doing this. So, just so folks know, I have an article in my newsletter where I actually have I don't call it the value driver tree, but I do have like where I've broken down financial metrics and then down to product support metrics and how you can connect them back and forth, which I can send out to everyone after this. But I think like your example, Scott, that you gave, there's airlines, heavy fixed cost, of course, also a heavy regulated industry, versus, let's say your traditional SaaS. Margins are big and fat, right? Very different models. So I think understanding that, and as a result, what are the important levers for the business? And then whatever product work you're doing, you got to know how to connect that back there. So I think that's a really, really important point. So Arun, appreciate your patience. You can put yourself off mute. Yeah, what's your question?
So several, in fact. So thank you for some of those thoughts, Scott. Some of the things that you said that the business outcomes, and that will put it very bluntly, will be either top line or bottom line. Effectively, all features, all initiatives have to contribute to either of these, right? There are a couple of things that thoughts around the attribution. So I built something expecting that the revenue will go up, and the revenue did go up. But is it because of this? I don't know. Or was it something else? Because whether something goes well or something goes wrong, there are either a lot of takers for the credit or it's an orphan, right? So revenue went up. Sales team will say, "Hey, I built my sales or pre-sales process worked better. My sales enablement process worked better." Somebody else says the customer service team worked better, and that's why revenue and something went up. I don't know whether the feature or whatever I built was actually a causing factor of that. So that's one point. The other is, so we effectively are working around hypothesis, and the company as a whole is effectively testing hypothesis. When we say increase engagement, Instagram says increase engagement, and that's how we're going to make money. That's a hypothesis. If we ask, hey, will increased engagement lead to increased top line or bottom line? We don't know. We just hope it does, even at the CEO level or at the board level, right? That's one. We might try and figure it out through experiments, but then it's hard to attribute. That's one point. The other thing that a comment that you made about the airlines, and that, hey, getting it full is the point. It might lead to folks going haywire, right? You say, hey, okay, my objective is to fill up the airline. Let's make all tickets free. You lose revenue, but your airline's full.
Yeah, so that's great. Yeah, the airline one is funny because, if you studied economics, you would know you want to get to the contribution margin is zero, right? Like you want to fill the final seats at a break-even cost, which is effectively free. But your marketing people will come in and say, "Hey, you're going to damage your brand because if word gets out that some people could buy a ticket for $20, then people are going to stop buying tickets for $200, right?" Like, so yes, there are multiple factors that come into that all the time. The attribution thing. So I want to talk about the attribution thing, and I want to talk about well, we're just hoping bit. So the attribution thing, the way I try and solve that is there's a big gap. Like there's a reason why I really focus on did it work as the step between did we finish and did it matter? Because you can't isolate the variables, right? Like you take your scientific background and say, well, let me isolate the variables. You can't do it. Like we launched a new promotion, we added a new feature. Which one drove the revenue? Right? You can't tease it back.
Or
But
it was just a festival or something at the time, and anyway the sales would have gone up. Maybe your feature didn't make any difference whatsoever.
yeah, I have a client in the energy business. When it's really cold, they make more money. Right? I mean, there's some stuff that's outside of your control. But okay, that's the first half of this answer. I'm going to answer the other one and then bring it back to the second half of this if I don't forget. So the other thing when you talk about we just do it because we hope it would work. What I would say, and this gets a little frou-frou, but it is all founded in science, so it's kind of okay, I think. You place your bets based on what you believe.
Mhm.
You say, I believe that making this investment to build this thing is going to change that leading indicator in the middle. And I believe that that leading indicator is leading to revenue. So instead of trying to attribute back to the revenue, you want to attribute back to that leading indicator. Say, I believe if I can increase the percentage of people who are using my app a week after the first download, right? Like because everything just kind of falls off the cliff. I believe that that's going to lead to more ad views of people playing my free game, which is going to lead to more revenue. So instead of just counting revenue and downloads, you would look at the usage 1 week after download. And whatever it is you built, your goal was to affect that usage factor. That's what you measure to tell you if you've got some attribution. And then you rely on the value driver tree to say, that's probably the indicator of value. Like I could probably isolate some of the revenue growth to that increase in behavior. But You don't have to do that because you're making your investment decisions based on what you believe.
And Scott, really quickly, I mean, ideally that belief is, of course, well informed. We're not just, putting our
Well,
finger
that's
up
the
and
beauty of it. It works both ways. It could be we're just taking a guess. And this is where some of the science comes in. This is the science of Bayesian inference, which is, and if you're a frequentist as a statistician, then I'm sorry, you're just going to hate everything I say. When we place that bet, the only thing we can place it on is what we believe to be true, not the statistics of what's actually true. It's just what are the odds that we place on the bet. We think it's between A and B. And A and B can be really far apart. I wrote an article a couple years ago, I think, called Uselessly Wide Estimation Ranges. I'm putting my finger in the air. I think if I build this new landing page, I'm going to get somewhere between 0 response and 1 million customers in the first day. I have no idea. I have no data. And so you look at that, and this is where we get to tap into, I love the way Jeff Patton calls it. He calls it build to learn versus build to earn. Right. So think about from an experimentation standpoint. If we're saying if I've got this crazy wide range, I think my initiative is going to drive between 1 million and 10 million euro in benefit. That's a big range, right? That's a whole order of magnitude. Maybe I can make the decision anyway because my estimate is it's going to cost me €500,000 to build it. So I'm like, okay, maybe I double my money. Maybe I get 20 times return. It doesn't matter. I don't need to invest to narrow that range down. I can have my finger in the air with that wide range because no matter where it is in that range, it's a good decision. Or you could come in and say, well, it's between 1 and 10. It's going to cost me 3 to do it, which means there's a chance that this is a money loser and a chance it's a money winner. This is when I would invest to get smarter about my beliefs. So yes, ideally you want a tighter belief, but it's important to not stop the work you're doing in order to tighten your belief. Just tighten your belief when you need to.
There's a follow-up question by Brent. How do you handle attributions when there is a time lag between success in a value driver input and the ultimate business outcome? You're kind of getting to that, but I think that's a good question.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's the leading indicator versus lagging indicator piece. And the second half of my answer for Arun's first question, which is waiting until you see the lagging indicators, is not a tight enough feedback loop to give you the ability to course correct. So you're making your investment based on a belief, and it's a combination of two beliefs. You've got like this solution hypothesis that says, hey, I think if I build this, whatever my outputs are, I'm going to cause this change in reality. I'm going to increase conversion or order size or retention or engagement or whatever. And a second outcome hypothesis, which is built on top of your value driver tree if you have one, that says, I think if I can increase engagement, it's going to lead to this much money. The quarterly business review is where you come back later and you look at those lagging indicators. But you do that in order to get better at placing bets. You look at the leading indicators in order to get better at what you're building. To say, oh, this didn't work, let's try something else. And don't wait for the lagging indicator to tell you that it didn't work.
Deban has 2 questions. Deban, do you want to come on and briefly? I'll let you pick one for now, and then we can come back to the second one later, just so that we can get everyone a chance. You want to pick one and come on and ask one of them briefly?
Yeah, sure. So what I wanted to know is for those specific work buckets where the effects are seen or benefits or impacts are to be seen later, how do you suggest that teams show early signs of progress?
Yeah, so I mean, it is looking at the leading indicators, and the frequency by which you get feedback it's gonna be a little bit different everywhere. Like when I was working with Zappos, we were looking at hundreds or thousands of transactions or user responses immediately after making a change to a product detail page. And so we were able to get useful feedback faster than we could do anything with the feedback, right? So like that's at one extreme. I think going back into the other extreme, like faster partner launches. If I had an example, like so, I'm just gonna make up a scenario like you're in a B2B2C space or you're selling through distribution channel, and you have a belief that every partner is going to generate between X and Y in revenue or profit per year, and you have a belief that you can onboard, you have the capacity to onboard between X and Y partners per year, but there's a lag time. Right now, it takes you 18 weeks to onboard them. If you could shorten that to 9 weeks, then you've reduced the cost of delay, right, of the benefit of that partner by 9 weeks. So you're accelerating revenue and growing outcomes. So I would, what I would probably do in that specific case is I would unpack that partner launch into the series of steps that are involved in the partner launch, from contract negotiation to settlement, or like whatever all the different pieces are, where you've figured out your lead times and which are the levers you can pull, and then look at the improvements there. And so you can get that immediate feedback that says, of this 18 weeks, we took this 3-week process and we took it down to 5 days. And that gives me this feedback against the 18, yes, but it's an immediate feedback. And then I can say, okay, this next chunk of the process, we're taking from 24 days to 18 days or whatever. Like that's what I would look at is those near-term feedbacks of, am I moving the needle on the did it work question?
Scott, there's a bunch of comments I got about culture. So Arun, if you have a quick follow-up, why don't you ask your quick follow-up, and then I want to get to this question about culture and mindset that came up a lot.
Sure. So one quick point I wanted to kind of address both Shardul and Scott, which was the beginning of the conversation. Any PM who says, hey, you ask them, why are you doing this? And they say, I don't have access to the data. The data is behind something like Fort Knox. It's often because some senior leader has made this as a strategic call, right? They say, hey, we want to integrate AI features in our product. Why? I don't know, right? It's a directive from the board. It's a directive from the CEO, whatever. So if you ask the PM, why are you building this? They'll say, hey, I've been asked to build it. That's all. I really don't know whether it contributes to the top line or the bottom line, but it's just a directive to do it.
I had a client who, in the literal answer to the question of why are you doing this was because I want to keep my job. And this is
very fair answer, honestly.
Yeah. And this is the culture thing, in my opinion. But yeah, Shardul?
Yeah, so because you mentioned AI, which this has happened a lot, especially in 2025, but it's not unique to AI. There's a couple of perspectives that I have. One is that sometimes there are things that are done that, even if you happen to be sitting in the executive room, they know like there's no spreadsheet oriented business case that you can say, hey, the numbers line up perfectly and says we should do it. So like whether it was AI or blockchain or whatever the tech of du jour, it could be anything like, hey, right now, if I can go on an earnings call and say we're doing AI, the stock price gets a premium bump. And that's right now important. A lot of executive compensations are related to that. Maybe we're pursuing some kind of investment or strategic partnership. That cannot be talked about publicly, even within the company. But being able to show we have this capability is important for that. So they're willing to invest the time, energy, resources, people to actually do something. That's a bit more of a cynical view, but sometimes that happens. I will say though that certainly as a product manager, to your point, you should be asking the question. I always encourage them, don't just throw up your hands and say, well, they asked me to do it, so I'm just doing it. Because here's where it's going to bite you. Is later on you will be asked to justify it, even though it was handed to you. Or if you go on to another job in the future and you're asked, well, what did you do and why did you do it? You got to have an explanation. But on top of that, if you are in a product leadership role, and I don't know if I'm going to rub some people the wrong way, but having been in that chair, I think it is your job to find a way to either get access to that data or give them some explanation. Sometimes you are restricted. I'll give you a specific example. I was at a company, the CEO was pursuing a joint venture partnership. It was very hush-hush. We were literally told you cannot talk about this in any kind of meaningful way because it couldn't get outside. That put me in a bind. So I had to find a different way to be able to explain to my product manager, here's why we're doing this. And I even apologized. I said, listen, there's just things I can't share with you, but just so you know, there is a strategic opportunity that is being pursued by the company. And right now, I'll give you as much direction as I can, but this is a thing we have to do right now for this quarter. Right. And, give them some kind of reasonable explanation. So, it kind of goes a bit both ways. Boy, we got a lot of There's a lot of passion around this, I can see from the chat. So a few folks wrote in, and I'm going to read one person's comment. I think it's the overall culture and mindset of the organization. If you are if you are a customer obsessed organization, then not only product people, but all other groups like engineering, UX design, sales, marketing, etc., should be focused on the customer, which ultimately leads to look out for the outcomes for the customer instead of outputs. But building this mentality and mindset to be obsessed with the customer across the org is a major challenge. So there's a number of comments about this, about culture and mindset, and I'll actually put a corollary to this where I've heard from product people, well, if we are customer obsessed, because that's what they're taught, and if we do things for the customer, the outcomes will eventually come. Now, I don't know if that's always necessarily true.
Yeah, I don't think it's always true. I'll point back to, was it around like 2001 when right before the dot-com explosion, all of the new internet companies advertising on the Super Bowl?
Yeah.
How many of them are still around right now?
Right.
Like there's a model I use, and I'm gonna do visuals with my hands. So think of a Venn diagram, valuable to the customer and valuable to the business. And there's an overlap. There are things that are valuable for your customers. You make the investments and they don't move the needle for your business. It's just not worth doing. So you want to figure out which ones of those to ignore. And also there's stuff that's good for the business. Like we used to joke about, are they solving a customer problem or are they solving a company problem? When Evernote raised their prices insanely and locked down the number of devices you could sync your notes across, were they solving an Evernote problem or an Evernote customer problem? And so there's things you could do that maybe exploit your customers. I personally don't have any interest in helping companies do the things that make them money at the expense of customers, right? But there's lots of people who build careers doing that stuff too, right? So you want to hit that overlap. And when you find those ideas that are good for the business because they're good for the customer, then I'm 1,000% on board with that comment about the customer obsession culture. You just have to add that little piece of rigor of, yes, we're customer obsessed and running our business. And then I add a third circle around feasibility, which is there are ideas that are just objectively good ideas, right? This is good value for the customer, good value for the business, but it might not be an idea that your company has the capability or capacity to execute. You might not have a deep operations research wing that would let you do the kinds of math you need to do to support this otherwise really great idea. And so it's not a good idea for you, right? So you've really got to kind of hit inside all three of those circles.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, absolutely, certainly. And I know this is the stuff that makes the news. You don't make money at the expense of customers. That's just like, don't be evil, right?
Yep.
And I do agree, and I love, and this was one of the reasons why I got into product management, is because we are customer obsessed. We love our customers. We want to help them. We want to benefit them. But I realized early on that just doing something for the customer doesn't automatically translate to revenue or profit, which the bottom line is that's what's required in a for-profit commercial business. It keeps the lights on and allows us to do more cool things in the future. So I tell product teams, you have to, ideally, the customer benefit translates to business benefit, like you said, with your Venn diagram. But at a minimum, you do need to make the translation. So when you are if you are sitting with those stakeholders, that executive team, and you're making your business case, whatever, you do need to translate that. Again, context becomes important. Like, I'm pretty sure you probably have, Scott, but like I've worked in companies that were owned by PE firms, and they get right down to like their ratios and financial metrics, and like everything's got to like just tie directly there. It's incredible financial rigor. Now that's there with VCs. Maybe it's a little bit different, public company a little bit different, but the bottom line is that you have to translate that. And I also agree wholeheartedly. Sometimes we do work on things that are a net business benefit that are not really a customer benefit. It should not be a customer detriment, absolutely, but it's not really about the customer. A simple example is I worked at a company where, we had medical devices. And so optimizing our shipping and supply chain and logistics was a very important, especially for the COO. That was one of his like became one of his annual goals to reduce some of the costs there. So that was really, really important thing to do that resulted in, did it have a real impact on the customer? Not quite so much, but it was an important initiative that we absolutely prioritized on our roadmap, did a bunch of stuff, to cut costs and improve the bottom line.
Yeah. Another angle of culture, the one that I think is particularly important from an outcome orientation point of view, is I talk about it in terms of being order giver, order taker, or outcome oriented. And in the order giver, order taker world, somebody says, hey, go do this thing. And you just have to go do it. And the consequences of that culturally are that you're just a code monkey or a task person or a middle manager. Like you're doing what you were told to do. And it's kind of a bummer. Like, I mean, I got into engineering because I wanted to solve problems and help people. And when you don't have problems in front of you, you have to-do lists. You're abstracted away from helping people. So that's not the best job experience. The other thing, and now if I flip it around and say, hey, if I'm responsible for running part of a company, what I'm now saying is, I don't care what those people think. That's a whole lot of squandered talent and ideas and insights that I'm not going to tap into. If I tell an engineer to build ABC in this order, and the engineer looks at it and thinks, gosh, that could be built in a better way, there's no room for them to have that conversation. If ABC is the wrong thing to build, if I've invented a solution in my head, that engineer has no opportunity to participate in the conversation. And in an order giver, order taker culture, the designer has no room to participate in that conversation. The product manager has no room to participate in that conversation. Like the further you go up the chain, the more you devalue all the people that work at your company culturally by saying, I don't care to have your insights and inputs into how we shape the business. I just need you to do what I'm telling you to do.
Here's another one that I thought was really interesting, which was about the onus on leadership to define success. So the comment or the question was, leadership will not define success at the start of any initiative, nor include all the stakeholders who will be impacted by that definition in any meaningful, inclusive discourse at the start of the project. They also fail to give genuine buy-in and ongoing support once success is defined, and avoid establishing realistic metrics with routine reviews of the definition throughout the project lifecycle.
Yeah. And, I want to play on a comment that Nils added in the chat, do your best to deliver value, even if you're just handed stuff to build. And this is one of the tools I use to try and influence that order giver, order taker culture is I call it a coherence check, which is to say, hey, I've been told to build this thing. As a product manager, I am going to form a point of view of what I think it's worth. I'm going to say, okay, that thing, these are the changes I expect it to cause and how much. And here's my understanding of how valuable those changes are. And I will use that coherence check back with the leader to say, hey, okay, I'm going to go build this thing. Based on what I understand, it's worth this much because here's what it's going to go do. And if I'm wrong, that leader's going to say, no, you're missing the point. I have some breadth of perspective and some insights that you don't understand. Maybe it's I can't share with you because we're positioning ourselves for a joint venture or whatever. Or it's just simply, you haven't been exposed to this aspect of our business. Right? As a product manager, we've got a deeper perspective in our subset of the domain that the company operates in. We understand our customers, our market, our competitors, our engineers, our technology, what we're capable of doing in a space. And the higher up you go, the shallower your view is, but the broader your view is.
Right.
And so if somebody with a really broad view is saying, hey, go build this thing, I can use my depth of insight where this thing lives and say, here's my understanding of what we will get from that thing. Let me make sure with you that that's what your expectation is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. This was an easy one, I think, based on all the discussions that we are having, which are more difficult. So on specifically with regards to, deliverables that just need to be done, right? Either you are in healthcare or in fintech, like I am, we are heavily constrained with regulations, compliance, etc.
So, sorry, but you mean like we need to do it for some kind of a compliance or regulatory reason?
Yeah, as one of the constraints because of which that work is mandated. It may be others also, dependencies or client commitments. In your experience, what could be some, top two or three ways to ensure that in spite of these constraints, the teams are focused on impact while the product leader builds enduring trust with stakeholders, especially leadership?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm laughing because I love Nils's comment. Compliance changes help keep people out of jail. Um, So I had a client in financial services, and there was a big pile of regulatory non-compliance issues that needed to be addressed, right? Whether it was upcoming changes or just existing policies they were not in compliance with. And when you looked at that scope of work, it exceeded the capacity of their team to deliver. And the regulatory compliance people were saying, these are all must-dos. We have to do all this. It's regulatory non-compliance. It's like, I'm a rule follower, right? I'm not going to jail, right? And the CIO from the company came into that team and said, look, we're a bank. We're in the business of managing risk. Every one of these non-compliance things, they're not shutting us down. We're at the risk of getting caught, and we're at the risk of being penalized. And there's some calculus we can do to say, how would we treat the decision to invest in something that grows the top line versus an investment to eliminate a risk of penalty of regulatory non-compliance in a particular area? Right? They both cost the same. How do you choose which one to pick? And that really unlocked a lot of thinking in that space. Now, healthcare, I don't know that I've got any good answers. I haven't tried to solve this problem in the healthcare space. The we just have to do it comment can be a reflection of we just won't go to market. And like I said, I don't have the experience to lean into those anecdotes, but in the fintech space, it's much more a mechanical appreciation of risk and not just a mandate. Because if you can't do it, well, you can't do it. And therefore, that means you can choose to not do it.
Yeah, I have worked in healthcare a lot, almost 15 or so years. And I would say, so there are situations where you kind of just have to do it, right? Because there is something bigger at stake. Like literally the business could get shut down, or the fines are so onerous, or you lose your license. This is particularly in the case where, like, let's say, like I worked at several health tech companies, and our clients were health systems, insurance providers, and so they have compliance standards. Where like I've been on calls with physicians, like I will lose my license if the system doesn't do this. So then you have to sort of sometimes you just have to kind of suck it up and then figure out, okay, how and where can we prioritize it. But in other instances, I think just to piggyback on what you're saying, Scott, I think you can have a rational conversation with the compliance folks and the legal folks and the risk folks. We have to be empathetic towards them. This is their job. Their job is to keep us out of hot water. Their job is to follow the rules. That's what they get paid for. That's what they've been trained on. So totally fair, but it's easy enough to have still a rational conversation and say, okay, well, can we, I don't want to oversimplify this, but like, can we rank order the risk factor here somehow? Like in some case, like, well, if this could result in millions of dollars of fines, or there is some, it will affect our public brand reputation, right? Okay, like that's the one that could get like the CEO's attention. Other ones is like maybe it's a slap on the wrist, or maybe it's more of a timing factor. Okay, it's a risk that we're not going to face now, but maybe later. So you can do some of those trade-offs. So I thought I saw Mark's hand raised.
No, I was just going to. I've worked in healthcare as well for over 20 years. What I've done with any like regulatory or any type of state mandates is I also try to show if you don't do it, what's the cost to you. So whether it's to your point, getting fined, data breach. I worked in fraud, waste, and abuse. So we would calculate, okay, if you don't start cutting the fraud now, here's the result. You're going to keep bleeding. So some of it is kind of a negative. If you don't do this, here's what's going to happen. And that could be, you get a federal audit or a state audit and you get fined. And in some cases, the fines can be quite heavy. So try to figure out what's the cost of not doing something or doing something the way you've been doing it where it's not going to work. Rather than if you use this, here's what you gain.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Mark. One other thing I'll say really quickly for folks is that sometimes Like I've been in situations where when we get into our product strategy, roadmap planning, capacity planning, if we think that there's a lot of these things that, on the compliance or the regulatory side that we have to do to meet, and it's going to require some significant investment of engineering or anything like that, we'll actually dedicate some capacity. Hey, for the next 6 months, we're going to dedicate, whatever, 5%, 10% of that, so 60% is towards revenue, 20% is towards this, and 5% is towards just meeting these regulatory compliance things. So let's get to some more questions. So Arun, thank you for being super patient. I wanted to get to some other folks since you had a chance to ask some of your questions early on, but
Absolutely.
yeah, go ahead.
Uh,
You got a follow up.
yeah, I think the conversation really blew up and got really intense just before this. But again, harking back to something that Scott mentioned earlier about, I'm just going to take the example of the homepage. Hey, if I build a new homepage experience, I could get anything from 0 to 1 million views the next day, right? And when it's that broad, how do you try to narrow that distribution or that standard deviation, whatever, come to something a little more reasonable? You might have to do more discovery and experiments. So first go find out whether people are getting stuck at the homepage, whether it's too cluttered, do some UX research and things like that. This is valuable. The pushback that I have seen, again, lived experience, is that it takes time. And eventually senior management asks, hey, you've been sitting here not delivering anything. You've been disproving hypothesis and say, hey, maybe this is not the right thing to build. Maybe this is not the whatever. Whereas competitors and the rest of the world are churning out features and they are learning by doing. So just do what I ask you to do, or just go build something and get on with it, right? And not worry about whether it actually adds value to either top line or bottom line. How do you tackle something like that?
Uh, well, I mean, when you're told to just do something, you still just do something. But I would never stop worrying about whether or not I expect it to add to the top line. So there's a thing I use called the confidence rubric. Simon might remember this. So I used that when I was with him, where instead of talking about your confidence in your belief that something is going to happen, if we build this, if we change the way the homepage is organized, then we're going to get greater signups or whatever. What you talk about, and this is a heuristic for managing uncertainty. You talk about the justification for your confidence that it's going to happen. And a 0 on the scale is I have no idea. I'm just going to try something. The 1 on the scale is that it's informed by expert opinion. I've seen it work in similar cases. A 2 on the scale is I've got examples that I can extrapolate from. I've got direct inference. I've got data. I've run an experiment, right? So you can walk up the scale with ever increasing justification for your confidence that what you're going to do is going to go work. And not every bet has to be a sure thing. Some of your bets can be long shots, but you bring that dimension of, I don't know, maturity maybe into acknowledging that some of the things you do, you have no idea. You're just trying to do them, and some of those ideas are great ideas that end up really panning out, and some of them don't, and that's okay. Like you're managing the risk of a portfolio of bets to improve your product or your website or whatever.
Yeah, there's an element of, we can A/B test all day long, but at the end of the day, until you get into the hands of customers, you don't know. Now, that's not an argument to say we should just keep pumping out features and shipping stuff for the sake of it, right? It should require some rigor and some discipline. We have a hypothesis, the stuff that Scott's been talking about. But at the end of the day, like until you get it out in front of customers' hands, you don't really know if it's going to work or you're going to get the outcomes or if customers are even going to like it at all. So there's always kind of an element of that. How you go about approaching and doing that can vary. Sometimes, and I've been in situations where sometimes you push something out the door for optics. So you mentioned competition. I've worked in markets where it's extremely competitive. Almost every week, it feels like a competitor is out there with a press release saying, "We've launched this cool thing. We've launched this cool thing," and it does it gets the CEO's attention. Like I worked for a CEO, and he actually did me the favor by forwarded me a string of emails from the board that he got over 3 days because one of our big competitors, actually two of our big competitors, announced some key features. Now we found out through the grapevine, it was all hype. Nobody actually used them. But here's the situation. Not only was the board asking questions, but we had a big industry conference coming up. And customers were going to come to those competitors' booths because of this. Hey, we've launched this shiny new feature and we didn't have any in comparison. So there's always a little bit of that. We actually didn't, just so you guys know, we released the feature. We were able to talk about it at the show. Not a single customer ended up signing up because of it or using it, but sales was super happy because our pipeline was full and we did, by extension, close a lot of deals. So was it worth it? Kind of back to somebody had asked that question about, I built this feature, did it really affect revenue? I mean, did that feature directly impact revenue? Probably not, but as an outcome, given the context and the situation, yeah, it was kind of worth it, right? You generated like $1 million in sales. So
Yeah, one of the questions in the chat was around when you're not profit motivated, like you're in an NGO. And my wife ran a nonprofit for a while, and when you look at metrics like how many people are we helping instead of how many dollars of profit are we creating for our shareholders, you use the same thinking. You're taking it back to the what it is you're trying to accomplish. They're
yeah,
just not measured in dollars. Yeah.
yeah, I think most of everything we've been talking about here today has been, in a for-profit commercial enterprise type situation. I've worked for or with a couple of nonprofits, not NGOs, but nonprofits. Every nonprofit, they have a mission and they have their own set of outcomes that they've defined, right? In terms of their social cause or whatever they want to move the needle on. So I think the principles are the same. You want to tie it back to those things. So like we started with this engagement example right at the top. Like let's say if that was the metric, right? Engagement that we're trying to do on the website or whatever, how does that tie back then to the nonprofits outcomes and missions, either directly or indirectly?
So a couple of things I would shout out. John Harmer, thank you, sir. He was sitting next to me when I came up with the confidence rubric. Dropped a link to an article I'd written about it. And Justin asked a question about an amazing book called Thinking in Bets by Andy Duke. He asked if I'd read it, and yes, I very much have read it, and I love it. And Nils has bought it, and if you haven't read it, you should. Like when people ask me for product management book recommendations, if you're already a product manager, I'm not going to recommend a product management book to you. I'm going to recommend something else, like Andy Duke's Thinking in Bets, or Julia Galef's The Scout Mindset, or Gary Klein or Gerd Gigerenzer. Like it's all of these people in the adjacent spaces around uncertainty management, hypothesis, business acumen, whatever. Like those are the things we need to learn to get better at product management if we're already product managers.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I actually a long time ago and even till today, I don't really read product management books. And first of all, most of them I think are too like agile heavy and that kind of stuff. I read more books on on business, on commercialization, leadership skills, communication skills. I think those things I found, and I haven't read that book Investment Bets, but I'll have to check it out. But portfolio management, that's another great skill. So books on that, how to think things in those terms, because I think largely a lot of what we do in product management is that, we're kind of being portfolio managers. Hey, do we bet on this thing or do we bet on that thing next? Because we always work with constrained capacity and resources. I had a CFO who was a very kind mentor, and I was young and I was making this big business case for like we should invest X and get a whole bunch more engineers because we can do so much more. And his comment to me was, "This is great, but just so you know, even if we spent $10 million more, we just have a new constraint. We we will never run out of appetite for wanting things to do. So, you've got to tell me how are we intelligently using the resources that we have before I can buy into the fact that, hey, I'm going to approve getting more resources."
Yeah. I like the way Rich Marinoff puts it. We never have a shortage of good ideas.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh, there's a shout out to How to Measure Anything. So Nils I don't know if you're a fellow Bayesian, but that's where I got it.
We have a number of great episodes coming up. Next week, we've got Teague Hopkins to talk about AI enablement and system building. We've got Rena Alexin from Product Side, who's going to be talking about how you, as a product manager, can gain decision rights. Matt LeMay and I are going to do something insane, which is we're going to actually take features and do a live feature estimation challenge. So you guys will either get to learn with us or laugh at us. Probably more the latter, but we'll see how we do. Jen Simpson will help us talk about the PM engineering relationship. Rahul Abhyankar will be talking about go-to-market for product managers. Matt Moore, influence without authority. Greg will be coming and talk about product management for a tech-enabled service. That's really interesting. Todd Blacker, managing up to executives. We've been talking a little bit about that here. And Said Khan, the disconnect between PMs and product leaders, which is a bit of what we've been touching on as well. So you can go to streetsmartproductmanager.com/events, or if you're one of my subscribers, you know you've been getting updates on this as well. Also, I have talked a lot about it in my newsletter, and I've already done a few episodes on this very topic about outputs to outcomes. I did an episode with Mike Smart, who I mentioned earlier, who's actually on our call, and you guys can see his beautiful picture of his beautiful face right there on the screen. Anyways, it was called Tickets to Trust. So I'll send everybody a link to that. It's up on my YouTube channel as well. All right, well, thanks everyone. Thanks so much for participating. Scott, thank you so much. This was absolutely great. Thanks everyone for the engagement. Obviously, we probably could have gone 3 hours on this thing, to be honest. There's so
Yeah,
much.
I mean, I didn't even say problem statements once, and that's another key piece of outcome
You
orientation.
know what? Maybe we'll do a follow-up just on that, because I think that's you're right, we never got to, but that's such a key piece on I don't want to make this sound like a step-by-step waterfall process, but it is a key piece on the front end to getting to those outcomes. I think, as you and I talked about in our prep call. So, but maybe we'll do a follow-up just on that.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks, guys.
we could fill a show on that for sure. Thanks
Absolutely.
everyone for coming, and thanks
Thanks, everyone.
Shardul for inviting me.
Thanks for being on, Scott. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your weekend. Take care. Bye.